Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is hopefully educational and entertaining for those who have limited experience in installing a GPU Waterblock. That's what we're going to be doing today and talking about pre and post data. Okay, so today is going to focus on not a new card. It's older technology, the 3090. It is the top card that I have right now, but along with this card, I believe is still relevant. If you've looked at some of my other videos that's on my channel regarding my 3080 and how the 3080 still plays most games that what I need and is still a level of productivity that I have. I've focused a little bit on the 3090 now, and I wanted to put out information regarding what happens with an air cooler, how do you put a water block on a card, and what are the benefits of putting a water block in a custom loop. So you'll see in the lower pane that I've got my current 3090. And I also have the information listed for you here, the 3090 along with the 4090 and 5090. The video that's currently running is the current card that we'll be talking about today, and it's disassembly. I'll be jumping back and forth talking a little bit about what's going on here. So right now we're just trying to figure out how to disassemble the back plate, get the OEM air cooler off the card. But while that's playing, you've got the 3090, and it's a GeForce RTX 3090 Vision OC 24 gig. And you can see how it compares to the 4090 and 5090. There was a big performance jump from the 30 series to the 40 series. And the CUDA cores were 10,400, and the 40 series has 16,300, and the 50 series has 21,700. I'm trying to get my hands on the 40 and 50 series, but they're very hard to come by. And the 40 series is very expensive compared to the original price. So in order to install this water block, as I mentioned, it's the Gigabyte, and I'm going to put a Bixby water block on, and that's going to be unique in the fact that it's not just one-sided water block. There's an active plate as well as an active back plate. So the water then has to communicate to the front of the card and the rear of the card. Again, if you do choose to do something like this, please do it at your own risk. This is an enthusiast group after all. It's not rocket science, and I'm not saying that my technique is perfect and that you should follow everything that I do, but if this helps you come to terms with how to perform this task, then that's a step in the right direction. So you'll notice here that I'm trying to get the screws off the back plate, and then there were some screws on the I/O panel that required removal. Now, there was only one of the 5, I believe, that required removal. I ended up taking them all out, but it was okay. I ended up putting the 4 along the bottom back in. Those didn't need to be removed. Just the one that I removed there, and everything would have come free. But again, every card is different, and every card comes apart just a little bit different, and it can be manageable. But this is what the water block looks like. It's mainly 3 pieces, and we're going to lay out these pieces and parts as we get to them. This is the active plate, and this is the active back plate, and this is the piece that communicates between the 2 front and back channels. Okay, so the OEM fan has now been come loose. And now we just need to unplug the fans and the power connectors and the LEDs that are part of the card. Excuse me. You can see that there's thermal pads that are still in good shape and thermal paste that was applied to the GPU. I'm just making sure that I get all of the pads off of the card, and I'm going to put the air cooler away and put all of the hardware back onto the air cooler. As if I would ever want to go back to something like that, it can be opened up. All the original hardware, screw locations, everything is going to be able to be replaced. But I don't anticipate going from a water cooler back to an air cooler, but you never know. This would be, I don't anticipate also buying another 3090, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm acquiring GPUs for my testing. So I'm, and just if there was some reason that I wanted to move to an air cooler again to test the 3090, that would be the only reason I would do this. And then once you have those screws that were sort of holding it down to the back plate, and it's a very unique power system. I thought I was buying a reference card for the Waterblock, and I quickly realized once it was in my possession that this was not a reference card design. The power plug is in a weird spot. It's got the I/O panel and the plugs. There's an odd height difference, and that's the reason why you've got this little notch here to clear the weird I/O panel that it has. So that left Waterblocks not being very plentiful for this particular card, unfortunately. Okay, and I'm just basically putting the hardware back so that I can put the OEM cooler away. So then this is what the active plate looks like when you have the active plate that's going to sit on top of the GPU die, and this is going to press down onto the memory modules, and there's some cutouts for the other components on the PCB, and I'm going to apply the thermal pads directly to the PCB and then let it line up and articulate with the water block when it comes to that point. If you notice, this is the active back plate, and there's clearance for the hardware for the screws that are holding the die to the active top plate. And there will be thermal pads only on the backside here. And if you notice, it's all flat, and we'll get to that point in the installation. I took some liberties and added some additional pieces of thermal pad where you really didn't have to, but I did solely based on when this card was refurbished and sent back to me. He had thermal pads in this location, and I thought if he believes that there needs to be heat transfer from this location, I'm going to put them there too. Is the only reason why I took that liberty. So that when you put the water block onto the card, this is what we want our end result to look like. So you've got the active plate and then the active back plate underneath, sandwiched together. You'll have some hardware that communicate between, and then this is that communicating piece that's going to help us with the water flow. And so just to orient you, you can see it says in and out right here. And the way you have to water this in is you've got two plugs that you're going to put on this side. And when you put those plugs in place, your water pump, either out from the CPU or from your distro plate or however you've plumbed your system, the water comes in this part, through the card, out, through the communicating channel to the back plate, communicates from the back plate, and then out. So you just have one pair of fittings to make sure that both front and back are cooled, and basically just to make sure your memory stays cool. And from the disassembly video, this is me just making sure that I get my air cooler tucked away neatly and safely. You can see that I dropped a thermal pad there. It came loose, but you just tuck it back in. Everything's there if I would want to use it again. So just sort of put it in its OEM box, and we'll be ready to start laying out the new water block here soon. You can tell that I've already cleaned up the die and sort of taken a soft cloth and easily wiped down the memory chips to make sure that there was all the residue from the thermal pads and everything was cleaned up. because we will have new thermal pads to put down. I didn't want to reuse them. You could probably reuse them. They look to be in good shape, but nonetheless, it's giving me new thermal pads. I'm going to use it. Okay, so we're laying out the instructions here, and this is sort of what I'm reviewing with you on the other screen here. And this is why there's not a lot of instruction to this, and I had to actually go and download these images from their website because I want to make sure that I get the thermal pads in the right spot. So once you clean it up is the top card, and then it shows you here's your memory modules to cover, GPU die to put paste onto, and then you'll have to cut thermal pads to fit in small slivers on the back even. Now, I added one here because the previous repair gentleman added thermal pads to this section as well. And then this is the memory modules on the back. That's why you have an active back plate. You've got memory on the back. If you only cool the front, your memory temps can spike, and then there's no real reason to water cool your card if you're going to let half your memory overheat. So that's my opinion anyway. There are kits that don't use an active back plate. I don't understand why you would. You've gone this far, do it right. That opinion is free of charge. So you can see I'm laying out the components, and it comes with power cables to adapt to the way that card is set up. I'm going to use the Duranaut thermal paste from Thermal Grizzly. He just released this thermal paste, and I'm interested in seeing how well it performs. I've not used it yet. I've only used the Hydronaut paste in my Keep It Cool series for all those CPU changeovers. And you can see that I'm now unpacking the active plate, and the back plate is also on the horizon here. So back to this other screen, once you get your memory thermal pads laid out, this is basically the extent of your instructions. You know, I guess from China, this is all you're going to get, and that's okay. Interestingly enough, your thermal pads are all the same thickness for this kit anyway, excuse me. And that's not common. The other blocks I've put together were varying thicknesses, and you have to make sure that you get the right thickness of pads in the right spots. In here, it was very easy because they were all the same thickness. And then you're going to use washers and those 4 main screws to press the main block against the die after you get your pads in place, your thermal grease down, and then put the top block onto the board. And then we're going to flip it over and then add our pads to the memory modules on the back, and then set the active backplate down and use these longer, smaller screws to communicate through the board and to cinch it together and sort of sandwich it together. And again, same size pads. And then once it's sandwiched together, this is the communicating piece that allows the water to flow on the front and the back of the card. And so you have 2 larger screws and 4 smaller ones and 4 O-rings, and you make sure that they communicate well and so that it won't leak. And get it set in place, tighten it down, and that allows the water to go in one side, out, communicate to this side, and back out of the card. It's an interesting design, and you use the supplied power cables to adapt to your power supply. So with that, we're going to go ahead and focus on the installation, and let's get this installed. And so basically at this point, we're just trying to organize our plates and get ready to put our thermal pads in place. And if you don't mind, I'm going to watch with you. That's sort of me looking over this direction. So you want to lay out your thermal pads and make sure that you, have enough, and you think that you've got them in the right spots, and sort of anticipate how many you're going to need, how many cuts you're going to need to make. And remember, there are plastic sleeving on both sides. You need to make sure that you take plastic off both sides of these thermal pads. And one side is actually thicker and more sturdier than the other side. It's just by design. You can cut through one side of the plastic easier than the other. So, and once you start working with this, it'll make sense to you. And I'm probably talking to a bunch of seasoned professionals here that think this is ridiculous to go through this. But just in case you are newer to this, maybe this will help you install a block here. So you want to go ahead and make your cut. And I cut one long ways in half and put in the corresponding location. Now, and you will have to cut all of these to fit. Now, there are companies that make, I believe, an Optimus out of Chicago, Illinois. They're the Optimus blocks. I think they come pre-cut, and that's a step beyond. I mean, these are truly boutique blocks. But then again, if they perform as well as the CPU coolers did, I guess it's a shameless plug for Optimus right now. I didn't make any money on that. Optimus, if you're watching this, like I can use some of your products, man. They're great. Anyway, I already have 3 of their Optimus Signature V3s. They are excellent CPU blocks. Anyway, so now we're back to putting the thermal pads on the memory. And you don't have to cut these other than just how long you need them to cover the memory modules. So the other ones were so thin you had to cut the pad long way. Now all you really got to do is cut by length to cover the memory module that you're trying to cover. And you don't have to cover them individually. You just cut to the length to cover them all and just lay it across. Take the plastic sleeving off both sides. I have to say that again. And get it set. Now, we almost have all of the thermal pads in place, and now it's time to put the thermal paste onto the GPU die. Now, one thing I will say, this is my first time using this new product, and you'll see how it stops spreading very easily and smearing. And this is very unlike Thermal Grizzly. I was this close to just taking alcohol, rubbing it off, and going right back to my Hydronaut that I could have easily just pasted right on. There's multiple ways to put on paste, and I was so frustrated with it at this point because that's a mess. I don't make that kind of a mess normally putting paste down. And I used their fancy new spreader, and then I went back to the traditional spreader trying to make sure I got a small coat and no spots, no thin spot. I wanted to make sure that it was done right. But it ended up leaving a mess all over the place. It was a really sloppy job. I hate to put it on video, but hey, I'm just airing everything as I do it. You've seen me mess up before. We'll see if this works. And so this is basically trying to get the thermal paste all set. Now, just in case there's oils or residue onto the working surface of the water block, I went ahead and took some alcohol and wiped it down, and then took a microfiber towel and made sure that it was lint free, and trying to get it put into place. And now we're going to start mating the surfaces. And when you do, what I didn't account for was I now have to flip it over and put the 4 main screws to cinch the block against the GPU die. Well, the I/O panel is tall on this, and I can't sit it down and lay it flat. So then I was looking for things to balance this card, and so basically I laid the block down to where the I/O panel would hang over the edge, and it would still give me a flat surface, and I wouldn't be smearing the pads and hopefully not knocking them loose or anything. So at this point, you have to excuse my voice. It's trying to give out on me this evening. At this point, you want to put the 4 main screws into the water block. And this, again, communicates with the GPU die and cinches it up together. And again, every card is just a little bit different. There are some GPUs out there that have a middle center bracket that is actually between, and it gives it more rigidity between the PCB and the other components. And there's multiple layers of thermal paste, and it's just every card is a little funny. This one is not too terribly difficult to work with, but you just have to be really careful. If you're not careful and cautious with how you're handling these electronics, you can knock a component loose if you're not gentle with it. Don't do that, otherwise you're sending goods and services to Northwest Fix and no, Northwest Repair. That's the gentleman in Kentucky. But anyway, shameless plug. He's helped me out. He's actually worked at this card once already. Basically, when I was scratching that little sticker off the back plate, I was basically voiding any warranty that he was going to have with this card because I haven't had it back from him long enough. I was actually using it and it was working great. And when I got the GPU cooler, I thought, we're putting it on. All right, so now I'm just looking to make sure that I've got at least some contact from the thermal pads that I can see. It looks like we're making good contact, and the main plate is installed. So now we need to get the active back plate installed. Oh, I guess there was one tiny small screw. I don't know why that little lone guy has to be in there, but hey, that's what the instructions said. The 4 main screws and then that one smaller screw. All right. And then you notice that there's RGB that's active, the little 5-volt connector. So it'll plug into your motherboard for both the front and the front active plate and the back plate. So you got your Christmas tree lights when you like those kind of things. Christmas tree lights was never a thing when I was building a system. It wasn't until I started building these I realized how much money and time you could be spending with all the extra cables and cable management just to make all your lights and everything work, and fan controllers and light controllers, and it's interesting. Anyway, it's time to focus on the back plate. So I tried to cut this. I guess I left this a little long. Be very careful. Notice I was not really pushing all the way through that thermal pad. And when you start working with these, you'll realize how soft and tedious this will be, because even when you cut them to fit and you try to lay them out and you're trying to peel off that plastic, they will inherently start stretching on you too. So you cut out the perfect length and now it's long. So when I lay them out, I try to start laying it out and then sort of scrunch it back up together, and don't keep pulling it, because because as you pull it, you make it thinner, right? The thickness of the pad will change if you stretch it. And you need a certain level of thickness in order for when it communicates with the plate to get good heat transfer. So you have to be very delicate with this. Careful with the board, careful with these pads. And you're just doing the same thing. You're making sure that all of your memory modules are covered. I guess I left a few extra tappies in place here instead of doing my cuts. But so I just try to lay them out and then scrunch them back. Now, because the other components might be really close to those memory modules, and you don't want it to lay across, and if it's not supposed to, if the block isn't clearance for that, you can cause issues or poor contact. And so, again, just it's attention to detail here. Just be very, very careful. You see how that's a little wadded up a little bit? And I just move it around a little bit. Careful when you're picking it up, but just put it back down as best you can. Be easy with it. All right. That ought to do it. So that is the way that is all the instructions wanted you to do. Now, these two layers of pad, I noticed when I took the card apart, and it was from the new pad, new paste refresh on this since I got it back. He felt that you needed to have thermal pads there. Well, the GPU repair gentleman, if he thinks there needs to be pads there, I had material, so I'm going to do it. Plus, when you look at your back plate, the back plate was almost perfectly flat. So it wasn't like there were cutouts and it wasn't going to make contact. If the pad isn't going to make contact with your plate and the board at the same time, and it's only going to like lay on the PCB, that's worse because it's trapping the heat into the board. It's not able to generate and let it go anywhere. It's not going to magically go into the air. It needs to communicate with a solid surface to transfer the heat into the metal. So since the active backplate was perfectly flat, I took advantage of laying out a few more of those pads and letting any heat that was going to be coming through the bottom of that card be transferred to the back plate. It's an active back plate. Let's use it, right? So here is those smaller screws that are going in to the active back plate. And again, I'm using a folded up towel because of the IO panel is still too tall. That's the reason I'm doing that. So, but I'm going easy, and just like I did with the GPU die, if I didn't say it, I'll say it now, is that you do it in a crisscross pattern, and you don't do it all the way, You want to slowly make turns and make sure you evenly cinch it down. And that's what I attempted to do even with the smaller screws, a little bit each way, work your way around, get it to sink down. So now I'm looking again to see if I've got good pad touch and doing my final cinching it down. When I'm working on cars, I'm very anal retentive. I actually want to make sure I know what the torque specs are for things like this. They don't offer anything like that in the enthusiast market for the PC world. Otherwise, I'm sure I'd probably have inch-pound torque wrenches or whatever to make sure I got it just perfect, because I am notorious for over torquing fasteners. I've broken them right off. I get overzealous here. So I try my best to not over torque these things. And this is very small hardware. It'd be not difficult to over torque this and strip these out. And then you'd have an unusable block. That would be horrible. So now you're left with that communicating piece. So those two pieces that now need to communicate the fluid between the two plates. You've got there's two longer, larger bolts that go for the center that I'm installing right there. And then there are four, two on each end of it. You've got extra hardware from the kit, which is nice that they include extra hardware. I'm not going to argue about that. But when you're putting a manifold or something like this in, and this is, I guess, just comes from when you're working on, head gaskets and stuff in a car, they give you the larger screws in the middle, and that should be a key to you because those are going to be the ones that probably are going to be cinched down first. You want to work in the middle and work your way out so that as if it's getting pressed down in and you work the torque out. So you'll see me going from the center to one corner, back to the other corner, and back to your crisscross pattern. And trying to do it, hopefully, by feel in an equal amount for each bolt. And I didn't realize I was getting so close to the edge of the table there. But you get the idea, right? All that camera real estate, and we're dealing with the top of the screen. But live and learn. This is a work in progress, ladies and gentlemen. So as I'm crisscrossing this, we're nearing the end of this build, and was a very interesting design, a very interesting card. I think the money and the time is in this piece right here. Like I said, there's plenty of companies that make active plates and active back plates, and you would probably need 4 different fittings. And it's a nice design if it works, and I'll let out the cat out of the bag. It works pretty decent. That you just need 2 fittings. Now, I'll show you what this looks like installed, and Only thing I don't like about it is you have to have a fitting on the front and a fitting on the back. And I've got some 90s and some swivels, but I prefer to have all the fittings on one side and tuck them out of the way and keep it clean. But the way it is now, you have to have a fitting on the front, runs through the front of the card, communicates and runs through the back of the card and comes out. So that's just the way it's designed. I can't get around that. So you can see I'm putting the plugs in now that are going to plug each end of the communicating channel. And this winds up the installation of the water block. It is a very nice looking piece. Didn't know what to expect. It looks the part. Let's see how well it performs. Okay, so let's take a peek at how well this block works. So I've put out a couple videos, and you'll find them on my channel, looking at the 30 series cards, 3080 Founders, 3080 12 gig card, and then a 3090. And the 3080s already have water blocks on them. This is the first time I'm just documenting putting a block on one of my cards. And so I thought, what a great opportunity. Let's look at the performance of the 3090 air-cooled OEM cooler and a benchmark and see, do we get an uptick in performance? Does it matter? What happens to our temps? How good is it, really? And the office rig setup, that's the i9 14900KS. For those that are following along, you're familiar with this system. It's a delidded CPU already, and it's a Thermal Grizzly DirectEye Pro V1 RGB. And that's an excellent block. It was one of the top performers in the Keep It Cool series that I did on CPU, how to keep a 14th gen cool. The motherboard is a Gigabyte Master X. It's a Z790 EATX board. The memory is Team Group 96 gig 6800 for the XMP1 profile. I didn't overclock it any more than that, but I am running an Alpha Cool SSD block on that. So I had to take the fancy RGBs off and bolt the metal heat spreader basically onto each of the sticks of memory, and then put the memory module cooler on top where the water runs through. The GPU, you just saw me put the water block on it, the Gigabyte Vision OC, and then I've got a custom setup for water cooling my SSDs. So I've got 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte. With all of the video editing that I'm already doing, I'm realizing that's not enough. And I've got some 4 terabytes on the way. You just have to have space. When you're doing things like this, you got to have space. So how did we do? So these are not all of the synthetic benchmarks that I ran, but we don't need to data dredge that much. This proves the point. This is the air cooler and the previous runs I did before, and the scores from the 3D Mark and the VR Mark, just for frame of reference. CPU temps, you can tell, didn't really change, and why would it? It's the same CPU and the same water-cooled loop. What did change, however, is your GPU temperatures. Look at the level of cooling that you get. So this is the GPU temp, the memory junction temp, and the hotspot, respectively. So you've got your GPU temp at 60.4, your memory temp was 78, your hotspot was 73. When you put the water cooler on it, the water block, your GPU die went from 60 to 30. The memory went from 78 to 44. The hotspot went from 73 to 42.6. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This was across the board. Look at those numbers. That's the kind of performance that you can expect. Now, I'm very impressed with having an active backplate. I wasn't sure how well I'd like it. It does add to the thickness of the card in some some difficulty in getting the installation just right the way I want it. I'm going to have to go through and probably redesign this a little bit just to clean up the way it looks. But look at the performance of this thing. When you're looking at the scores, maybe a 1.6% increase in scores. Is that by chance? Is it a real improvement? I don't know that that's enough to really say yes, that you'll get a boost in performance. That might be a wash, but I will say that it at least went up in pretty much every test that you run. So the fact that it goes up in every test at least tells you that it's a step in the right direction, right? But look at the temp changes, anywhere from 41 to 49% reduction in temperatures. Crazy good. But again, this was just an OEM card, and put in an OEM situation, run the test, take the water block on, put it back in, didn't change any settings, didn't try to push it, didn't undervolt it, didn't try to, change the settings whatsoever, didn't overclock it. And this is what you get. But maybe some would say, well, these are very short, specific tests. It doesn't represent real world performance. And to that, I say, touche. Let's really look at real world performance. So the last time I put a video out that was any duration, it was a 90-minute multiple edit video of the compilation of the i9 14900K How to Keep It Cool series. All the main points in all the 3+ months I was pulling data together, I put it in one video. It's on my channel. It's a lot. And I'll be honest with you, I did it really for me. I was really proud of that work, and I wanted to have something as a reference and all in one place. And that video is that piece. And so hopefully you find some benefit to that. But a side benefit to that is that's a 90-minute video that takes a long time to render, at least for the 30 series. Let's see how long it takes, right? It's about a 30 gig file, and let's see how well the 3090 does with it. So here's the air cooler, and it took about 32 minutes and change to render this file. The GPU temperature was 58 degrees, 74 degrees memory temp, 72 degree hotspot. It took 331.7 watts, and your clock was about 1995, and your memory clock was 1219. That's sort of the frame of reference. Now, how much better or worse or indifferent did it make when you put the water block on it? So I put the water block back on it, loaded up DaVinci Resolve, didn't change a thing, said render it again. Let's see what we get. And when you use the water block, you get a 31-minute and change render time. So it saved you about 30 seconds. Okay, that's not bad. I guess that's good. Look at your temperatures, though. Is the water block effective? Yes. So the GPU temp dropped from 58 to 31 degrees. That's a 47% decrease in temperatures. There's your 1.6% change in performance again. It's weird that that's still 1.6 change in performance, but you have a drop in your GPU temp, a 41% drop in your memory temperatures, down to 44. The GPU never crossed 45 degrees for a 31 beat on it real world render file with a hotspot of 43 degrees. It used less power. The GPU clock was slightly elevated. Don't really understand why that is, or otherwise it was just so cool it can just go, right? And then the memory clock was the same. So it's effective. It's excellent, right? So what did we learn from all this? Well, to me, I'm going to keep water cooling everything, right? That's just what I love to do. I'm really passionate about water cooling, custom loops. Look at my other builds that I've got published with the group here. I've done this with my 3080 Founders. I've done it with my 3080 12 gig. I just couldn't compare and set it up like I did for my 3090. And it gave you a slight performance boost. I don't know if you think 1.6 is a big deal, but It allows for maximum cooling performance. You have almost 50% drop in your temperatures running it at the GPU wide open, right? And so if you want to overclock your card, you have some headroom. I've not done a lot of overclocking, never really felt the need to. It's always performed well enough. If I didn't like the performance, I'm sure I've held onto a card long enough. There's probably something new out there. But it's not like I'm working with the latest, greatest card and feel like I need to overclock it. But hey, I get it if you want to overclock. I kind of want to start playing with that and seeing if I can get on charts. But you have to be able to acquire GPUs, and that's once feasible and available. Like I say, feasible and available because it's not feasible to spend the money on the 40 series card for what they're asking for. If you have the money and that's what you want to do, please spend the money how you want to spend it. I have a family. I've got things going on. I've got other responsibilities to spend that kind of money. And if I was going to spend that kind of money, I want to buy a 50 series at MSRP. I don't want to buy a 50 series for $1,000 over or $3,000 over MSRP just because I want a card. I just can't do it. If you can do that and you need the card and you want the card and you've got the money, hats off to you, sir or ma'am. Spend your money how you want to do it. I'm going to have to wait this out because I will say, just as a friendly public service announcement, an FYI, the 4080 Founders, and basically it was a 4080 Super when it came out, was $999. The 4090 Founders Edition, MSRP, says, and even to this day, right on NVIDIA's website about the 40 series, starting at $1,599, which I thought was insane to pay that much money for a card. And now they're going for $2,300 minimum, up to almost $3,000 for a 4090. The 5080 Founders Edition MSRP, $999, and you can't find them. And even if you did, you're not going to pay that price unless you've walked into a store and have it in your hand. And the 5090 Founders, $19.99. If I could find some cards for MSRP, I would strongly consider buying them. I would like to get more cards in my repertoire and join the fray of doing my testing. I've missed out on the 50 series launch and doing testing. There's a lot of good content creators out there. I just wanted to be also one of them and be a part of it. I'm increasing my number of games. I'm trying to get 40 and 50 series GPUs, and it's very, very difficult right now. But I hope that you've learned more about the 3090 and the 3080 in my previous videos and can wait this out with me. So I want everybody to not have to overpay for their cards. If we all wait it out, maybe people will realize you can't charge that. People won't pay that. But I understand that's not really the real world we're living in. Anyway, with that, I hope you found the video entertaining and somewhat helpful. If you would like more information like this, more videos like this, please let me know. Like, subscribe. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe. God bless.